Welcome to another episode of The Evaluation Couch, the podcast where we talk about career growth and the field of evaluation. This is your host, Maria Montenegro. If you've been following this podcast, you know that I believe evaluators should be able to do what we love and meet our financial and personal goals at the same time. I remember at a recent event, I heard someone saying that people don't go into evaluation to become millionaires. And I think that's true, and that will resonate with a lot of us. Most evaluators I talk to are driven by a desire to create real and positive change. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be fairly compensated for the value that we bring and the expertise we bring. So I'm very excited today to be joined by Newhouse and Komani Cedano to talk about compensation in our field and to hear about their journey towards improving their business's compensation practices to ensure that their teams are paid properly and compensated fairly. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves to our audience.
Hi, everybody. This is Corey Newhouse. Maria asked me to share something about myself. Right now, I am on a fantasy and sci-fi reading kick. And so I feel like half my brain is in the real world and half my brain is in outer space.
I love that, Corey. You have to share what book you're reading.
It is, the one I'm reading right now is called Death of the Author. And it's this amazing book that goes back and forth between the point of view of a sci-fi author and the best-selling book that she has written. It's very fun.
Amazing. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Komani. I'm out of Buffalo, New York. And whenever Corey and I do presentations together, I have a list of things like I'm a Capricorn and I'm queer and this sorts of things. But maybe a unique, interesting thing, as Maria has asked, is that on Sunday I got to do the Dyke Liberation March here in Buffalo. And it felt really good to be out on the streets shouting about how we deserve healthcare as a human right, for example.
I love that. Thank you, Komani. So thank you so much for being here today to discuss such an important topic. I've actually talked about compensation, salary negotiation as a woman in this podcast before. So I love that we're continuing this conversation and moving it forward. And I thought it would be a good way to start to share our own compensation stories. So I'm curious to know, have you had experiences where you felt you haven't been fairly compensated, especially within the field of evaluation? And I'd love to hear what your experiences have been.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Ria. And two things came to mind. One was years back when I was an evaluation consultant for a small firm and was on a advisory committee at the request of my employers. And there was an honorarium that they asked me to sign over to the company. And all these years later, it really sticks with me that it caught me short that one, there would be an honorarium for something like that. And two, that my employers would ask me to hand it over to them. I did. And again, definitely sticks with me. The other example more recently, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate, are clients who believe that because we have a contract, they can request as many services as frequently as possible, as many changes as they prefer. And I appreciate that sometimes that's because of the circumstances that they're in, but it definitely feels like we're not being particularly fairly compensated in those situations.
Thank you so much, Corey, for that story. Hani, what about you?
That's such an interesting question, Maria, because fair is, of course, a really loaded question in any case. So the thing that had come to mind for me was just anytime I'm asked for an hourly rate, because hours are different for everyone. As someone who was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, I learned that hours are different for me than other people. And so I find it really unfair. And those hours, I can end up being paid nearly nothing if it's something I've never done before, if you were really calculating my hourly rate for what I was doing, or should I not be compensated if I finish a project in minutes that maybe would have taken someone else a long time. So that's just an ongoing gripe for me about fairness and time.
So interesting, Komani. I've never thought about the relationship between time and kind of productivity in my own ADHD. So I definitely have to think about that. That is so interesting. Thank you for sharing. So I'd love for you both to share with the audience the organizations that you both lead. So you're both business owners and you are in the positions where you make a lot of the decisions around compensation for your teams. So, can you tell us about your organization? How long have you been in business? What do you do? And how big are your teams?
I founded Public Profit in fall of 2007. So we are into the adolescence of the organization. Right now, we have a team of 17, including myself. And that's been our size for about the last 2 years and is about as large as I would like for us to be. I got great advice from Jane Reisman, the founder of ORS Impact, many years ago, that right around 15 to 17 was the sweet spot in terms of size. And it's always so wonderful to be with fellow evaluators, so I don't have to explain what the heck evaluation is, but can say rather that we take pride in a really participatory, hands-on approach to evaluation. I really want Public Profit to live in that space between rigor and actionability, usability. And I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do over the years to really, again, live in that sweet spot. We have the great good fortune to work with a huge array of different kinds of organizations, which suits me just fine. Everyone from large national foundations who sponsor stuff on NPR to small local arts organizations and everyone in between, which for me is one of the greatest joys of this work, is being able to collaborate with, support so many different groups of people who are doing such amazing work in different places.
In regards to my organization, I have a different pathway than most people into the world of evaluation and into the world of being an owner of a business that does evaluation work. So there's a lot of different pathways. It turns out like Corey is a founder and I am not a founder. So my company, Via Evaluation, was founded back in 1998. And myself and my co-owner now, we're managers who became manager buyers or manager owners as a part of a transition plan. And so I see myself as an entrepreneur, et cetera. But it's interesting because it's a very different pathway. I think a lot of folks I know in the evaluation industry are consultants and have really founded their own businesses or grown up within them. So it's a unique pathway. So I was lucky to come into an existing organization at that time. I think we were 9, 10 employees, and right now we're at 14. But we have varied over time, kind of like what Corey is saying. There's a little bit of a sweet spot that you find with a certain number of folks and a certain pattern. We had an upswing because last year we did acquire another company, Insider, who is a good friend and great company that we got to incorporate, and actually has really led to our unique value prop within the evaluation field, which is helping people optimize data using data warehousing services, data infrastructure, data architecture for folks who are facing, reporting challenges, compliance requirements, and management reporting needs. So a little bit more organizational wide data practices, if you will, and also being able to enhance evaluation work with those services. So that's what we're doing. Maybe it's obvious that we're working with mission-driven organizations, and that's what we care about in general. But yeah, that's like Corey said, it's really nice to not have to explain what evaluation is.
Thank you for sharing. And I like that you two bring different perspectives in terms of how you arrived to the position you are in now, as well as the story and the size and the tenure, so to speak, of the organizations that you're leading. The reason why we got connected was because you went to a retreat of evaluator entrepreneurs and you were presenting your work you both have been doing around improving compensation in your businesses. So I would love to hear from you. What was the motivation for you to start looking into this practice?
I have to say that it's a little bit of a lifelong journey when it comes to what inspired me to think about compensation in a business as unusual kind of way. Everything from being raised by Zen Buddhists as parents, growing up in Ann Arbor, a very liberal town, and seeing organizations like Zingerman's, which is like a actually world-renowned deli, produce books about doing business a different way. And so I think I entered being a business owner with the idea that, once I'm owner of this business, I'll be able to execute these compensation practices, and I had already been dreaming and scheming of. And then certainly in my relationship with Corey, we've bounced off each other and just continued to build. So I think that was really just the foundation of who I was. It was just, I wanted to see something different than the traditional systems I had worked in and had experienced. And I was said, if I'm at the top, this is the chance. I have that power. I have that privilege right now. I have these folks' livelihoods in my hands, literally. And what will make me feel good ultimately when I'm in that position? How do I know I'm doing right by these people? Were questions that I asked myself.
Love that. What about you, Corey? What led you to this path?
I wish I could say that I was as ahead of the curve as Komani has been in this. What really got me onto this path around compensation was honestly one of the biggest professional mistakes I have made in my career. In the very early days of public profit, we were small, as you might imagine. First 2 of us, then 3 of us, then 4 of us for a long time. And 2 of those early employees, one would ask for a raise very regularly, every 6 months. The other would say, "What's my salary again?" Roughly once a year. And since I was playing by the kind of business as usual playbook, and honestly afraid to talk about money, really nervous about saving money, that turned into a very large pay gap between 2 employees who essentially had the same tenure, essentially had the same role. That pay gap came to light, and rightfully so, the person who had been underpaid for a very long time quit immediately. And there were several moments there where thought that the company was going to close. This person was that important to us. And much more importantly, that my realization that I had harmed someone so profoundly for all different sorts of reasons that I could rationalize till the cows came home. And at the end of the day, I was not living my values as an owner, and that I'd harmed this other person who I valued so highly and continue to. Thankfully, we are back in relationship with one another. And so then I started doing a lot of research and just trying to look up wherever I could, blog pieces, articles, anything I could, because there were no books on this. And that was right around the time that I met Komani, and we started sharing what each other has learned. And so again, I think one of the reasons that I am so excited to talk about compensation and compensation strategies is I don't want what happened to me and my colleague to happen to other people. And so if we can spur some good ideas and get some confidence and tactics for folks to be able to use around compensation, that's a good thing in my book.
Corey, I have to say, I think it takes so much courage to share your story and to share your path. And it makes me wonder how much this story resonates, if at all, with other evaluation business owners, because I've definitely supported many evaluators that are feeling stuck in their careers, and compensation practices and compensation amounts are definitely recurring topics that people struggle with when they think about their career in evaluation and their retention, whether they're actually going to continue following their passion and doing what they love.
To add to Corey and respond to you, Maria, like, have other people experienced that? That's something I definitely observed. Like, luckily, I was just like the office manager while it was happening, but I also observed those like large pay raises because the loud person asked about it and saw the disparities that were developing. And so I also recognized and saw this problem, and thank goodness I can say, oh, I wasn't responsible for this, right? It wasn't my organization at the time, but certainly I saw that within our organization as well. And I think it was just a really huge component as many evaluators become business owners or business leaders and did not have business training. And so it's unfair to expect us to walk in knowing how to do this and how to navigate those situations.
Yeah, I like that reflection. You reminded me of an experience I had where I was on the harmed end of an equal pay increase, and I asked questions to understand. Like, I was really curious to understand how these decisions were being made, and mostly to learn for myself what I needed to do to also be on that receiving end. And I remember at the end of not getting answers, what I was told was, you have to trust the decisions that leadership is making. And I'm very curious to hear how that lands for you, being in that position you are now, having done all the work that you've done.
I'll be happy to share. And Maria, I know folks can't see us, as you asked us the question or mentioned, you've got to trust both Komani and I got a big smile on our faces. And the reason why, at least from my point of view, is that even though our company has taken huge strides in more equitable compensation, we now benchmark our starting salaries to similar firms in our region. We share the starting salaries. We put salaries on our job descriptions. We are in the midst of writing down, refining the specific compensation principles. And even with all of that, it's complicated. It's complex because, truth be told, each year we have a given amount of money that we are going to allocate toward pay changes, whether that's for promotions, cost of living increases, any one of a number of different things. And it's almost never enough money. And so sometimes the you have to trust is also because money is a very sensitive topic for folks. And so unless you have pay transparency in which staff members feel comfortable sharing their salaries, which I think is increasingly common, that people do feel comfortable with that. And the fact of the matter is that we as a leadership team are having to face a lot of trade-offs. And so if we're going to give person number one their planned promotion, and that uses up 90% of the dollars that we have for pay changes at all, how do we allocate the rest of that money across the team? That's also because we now are in a place where, for example, we pay the role, not the person. And unlike, I think, definitely where we were a long time ago and where many organizations still are, if people are in the same role with a similar level of tenure, they are getting paid within a few $100s, the same of each other. And that is the main bias interrupter that we have. Again, where it gets tricky is someone's been in that role for 3 years, someone's been in that role for 4.5 years, and do they make $200 more? And why do they? And all of those interesting things get complex. But fundamentally, just trust me, shouldn't be applied to what is the starting salary for this position? What are the size of raises that people generally are getting? So I do think that I can definitely relate with the just trust me feeling because it is so complicated. And I think that leaders should only save that for very small, specific cases rather than just trust us overall when it comes to everything having to do with compensation.
So adding to the conversation around trust us managers who say things like this, I wanted to say to accompany what Corey has already shared as like really best practices for this benchmarking and a lot of transparency around salary and pay. Some of the practices that we've incorporated, because I have a sort of framework where I share with people this framework when I start working with them, which is that I care about their physical, financial, and mental health. And these are the things that I do to care for each of those things, right? And this is what I'm able to do. And so that has included going so far as to do a presentation myself to everyone about best practices for car and home insurance so that they like save money on their car insurance, right? I'm not Geico, but I am trying to help people understand what these ramifications are because some of this knowledge is really protected and goes through certain groups of people. And as someone myself who was raised in poverty, I had to personally learn these things by taking a personal finance class in college. So I'm trying to share that because it was such a disadvantage in my life and so many sort of dollars lost along the way. So
what I'm experiencing is I'm starting to challenge my own perspective from seeing business owners' ways of showing they care about your finances as being just compensation decisions and progression decisions. And now you're giving me examples of different ways in which that care can also come up and be shown up. And I've never seen that in a business. So I appreciate you sharing that example. So on the topic of practices, that was my next question. I would love you to share. I know you've already shared some of the practices that you've putting in place, but if you could share some of the kind of quick wins that you implemented in your business in terms of more transparent and improved compensation practices, and some of the more challenging things that maybe you are still working on or that you implemented, but they were a bit harder and required more thought and more planning around.
The The quick wins that I can think of, the easiest is to put the starting salary on job descriptions. Everybody should do it. The starting salary should be made public, both for would-be employees as well as the current team. Another quick win that we did was to make annual salary increases related to the position, not the person, and to state what the range would be. So now what we do as we're shaping up each year's budget, usually near the end of the calendar year, November, December, we'll be able to tell people we are on track to offer 3 to 5% raises for everyone. We're going to offer slightly larger proportions of raises to our lower paid employees, slightly smaller proportions to our higher paid employees. Those were things that were straightforward to do. Harder to do was, easy. A quick one was the idea of benchmarking salaries to similar firms. More challenging to do that. I'm really glad to say that we commission a study in collaboration with what we call our sister firms, several evaluation firms here on the West Coast of the U.S. Every 2 years, we have a third party collect really detailed information about salary, benefits, and the like. That was a medium-sized lift. The big lift was then when the data comes back, deciding what to do with it. And for the first few times that we commissioned that study, we needed to make quite substantial changes to the starting salaries for our team so that we could be better in line with our sister firms. And that had huge ripple effects on other parts of our business. That I was really glad to discover that was something that our team understood was a big change and was something we wouldn't necessarily be able to put in place instantly. And people really appreciated being able to see that comparison information. So those are the big ones that we've done. I'll turn it to Komani to share some of the things they're doing, and then I can speak about things that are still on the horizon for us.
In New York State, something passed some many years ago that required you to provide compensation letters every year to your employees of what they're making. And that was or is maybe a great place or an easy place to start. Even just looking yourself at the packages that you're offering folks can be revealing, right? Sometimes we don't actually think through or actually look at across what people are doing. So maybe just that first step of looking and seeing if there are disparities is really just an easy thing. And then giving out those compensation letters. The second part that I would offer, and certainly I wholeheartedly agree with Corey, I'm just not going to repeat her recommendations, but certainly I am a strong believer of the win-win of providing a really large and therefore competitive benefits package, and that those benefits are part of your compensation and doing education and training around that. Examples are a very large match on a 401k, paying fully for health insurance, including dental insurance and other insurances. Because expenses, as I've trained my staff, I hope they all understand this, is a win-win, right? I don't get taxed on them and you don't get taxed on them. We both don't get taxed, but you're still receiving the benefit of those things. I say the most expensive way for me to pay you is in dollars. And so let's consider what other things you want in life and whether there's a way for us to make that be part of this. And then a lot of that kind of consideration has come from my own consideration about compensation and what would I want? And then can I create that for everyone here? So we've done various health challenges, for example, many years ago, we got everybody Fitbits. Cause I don't know, if you wanted a Fitbit, that's something I can easily make an expense of the company. But then everybody got a Fitbit, which is health tracking, pros and cons, many things. But so something around thinking about benefits and what you're able to offer and remembering that win-win. As far as more challenging elements, for me, walking into an existing system of compensation disparity and wrestling with how to navigate that has been a challenge since I walked into that situation. We have not just salary disparities, but we have some really long-term staff and then a gap, and then shorter term staff. There's this kind of gap, which also is contributing to some of that disparity. So that has been really challenging to navigate. What does changing that system look like? We followed those best practices that Corey uses of the benchmarking and really engaging our staff in helping find possible jobs that they could be applying to. But we have to continue evaluating what those baselines look like. And we have to stay really present and relevant with the changing circumstances of business, right? So like right now, for example, we have transitioned into a remote first environment as an organization. We used to be really based in Buffalo, but post acquisition, we have employees who are across the US, which means that not only do they have different cost of living requirements where they live, but we have to figure out how that's fair within among our staff, right? So like they're also comparing to each other. And so how do we compensate for that is something that is like still something we're working on. And I think that's like an ongoing thing as I talk about setting up processes and practices instead of policies and plans because plans just like never go the way you want them to. And so finding ways to create an iterating system is something that is a challenge and a beautiful one, but it does take work. And then I would also say that we transitioned to a 4-day work week, which was like one of the many things I really was excited about for our organization. And that has come with its own challenges of what hours and time look like, right? And whether or not that is giving us the respite and the breaks that we need as knowledge employees, as people working in the sector that we're working in, especially in current times. And so that has been a challenge in kind of a different way of incorporating a really progressive practice and finding how to do that within our organization, how to bring employees into a 4-day work week. That's definitely taken time. And then the last thing that I would mention that was like in the challenging, maybe I'm saying too many challenging things, is like Corey, we shifted to what roles pay and cost of living increases for our employees. And within that system, there's an assumption that everybody has continued to earn their place within the organization. And performance management comes into question. And employees look at each other and think things like, why are they getting the same raise? It might be a percentage, but like, why are they also getting this if they are having performance problems? And we're aware of it as a team. And so there's a certain expectation when you change the compensation practices that your performance management is on par with being able to say, everyone here deserves this compensation. Everybody's earning it and contributing to this team. And so communicating about that, the value of different behavioral styles, for example, and the value of different types of contributors. And myself, as someone who comes from this ADHD situation, my brain doesn't work like other people's, and it's easy to forget people's values. And so we've done a lot of training and ongoing training around behavioral models and ways to understand ourselves and other people, because that all comes into play as we've talked about navigating salaries and the relationships amongst colleagues is something that is delicate. And while we want to have transparency, it's also a sensitive topic that you have to be really careful about. So that is something that has really been on my mind, is navigating the balance among these things.
Wow, there are so many things both of you shared that have just completely made my brain go in 100 different directions. First of all, oh my God, I wish I had the experience of being an employee in an organization that is implementing this. I think that's just so amazing and different to what I have been exposed to in my career and what I know many evaluators are exposed to as well. Love the emphasis on education. You both mentioned challenges, and I think as you're discussing challenges, you're thinking of more challenges, and so much respect for both of you because this is challenging work. It's a sensitive topic. There's equity implications. There's so many things to consider, and you're wearing multiple hats. The hat of a leader who cares about their staff and the hat of a leader that needs to think about the business longevity. And so definitely can appreciate the challenges, but I love also the transparency and balance you bring and the care you bring. I've never heard of these type of decisions being implemented alongside education for staff to also perceive these things differently. So I just absolutely love it. And this brings me to the next question. And I'm sure listeners are also thinking, I want to know more. I want to learn about their experiences, what works, what are these best practices. I want to hear more initiatives. So I think it's a perfect transition for you to share with us what is the book you're working on And also, I'm very curious to know what lessons you've learned along this journey, because I'm imagining that your book revolves around your lessons.
Thank you so much, Maria. And yes, I'll say it's been so fun to be working on the manuscript with Komani, and it really does delve into many lessons that we've learned, and we're trying to make the book as action oriented as possible. So both describing both business as usual and trying to show the shortcomings of those approaches, and then also some alternatives. And I'll say, for me, I think one of the main things that has stepped to the fore as we've been working on this book is the fact that when you, both because most evaluation owners are evaluators, not MBAs, and because in my case, I am a white, cisgender, heterosexual woman, and a lot of the way that bias and racism works is that it is meant to be invisible to people like me. And so much of my journey, so much of my lessons as a leader in this place have been just being able to see things differently, being able to step back and really try to understand the reasoning. All of these practices, all of these business as usual practices have a good reason. They are not there purely for cruelty. I'm gonna say outright, any owner of an evaluation business, as you said, Maria, we're not in it to get rich, and we're not robber barons trying to squeeze every last bit of value out of people. And so many of the reasonings for compensation decisions, give raises to people who ask for them, give raises based on perceived performance, keep as much money in the hands of the owner as possible. Those all have reasons, but not necessarily a values aligned reason. And that, I think, is a lot of what the book that we're working on is about, as well as sharing stories from other service business owners, like accountants, of course, fellow evaluators, of how they're doing things differently. And then I think that the last thing, just the huge lesson learned for me throughout this process is it is very scary to be more transparent. It feels very vulnerable, and it is better than trying to hold everything secret and private and hoping that no one asks. And so it's one of the many cases when as an owner, as a business owner, as a leader, you have to choose how you're going to be brave. And this has been a really good choice for me.
Yeah, I feel like this book has been just so wonderful to write because it's finally a place for us to really put down these stories that I've been so many times asked about. I can't tell you, I've done countless conversations with people about how to transition to a 4-day work week, and why do I and how do I do the benefits that I do, and what did I implement for this? And I am so happy to share those. And I'm just like hoping to share them with a wider audience and make it more accessible for folks, right? Like, I just would love to be able to help support organizations. And I think Corey and I's niche within this is organizations who are trying to transition from that business as usual to a more progressive, maybe even radical type of organization, right? And so how do you make that shift? How do you do the organizational change management? How do you go through that? And so we really want to share our own stories, lessons learned, and hope that's something that other people can be inspired by. As far as my own lessons learned, honestly, sometimes I think, I've spent a lot of times with other business leaders, and we have a group that we've jokingly called Amateur Business Owner Therapy, because sometimes you need peers to talk to about how hard it is. And I just had a conversation earlier this week where we discussed exactly the challenges of being in the position that we're in, particularly at the time that it is. Not only are we navigating normal leadership challenges like communicating effectively, and then the interest in promoting these practices and being really transparent and educating our staff, we're also trying to toe the line that is like enough information that they feel informed and not so much information that they feel scared as employees. And so how to carry the weight of the honest fear of where we're at right now. Like, the evaluation field feels scary. And yet here I am showing up for an organization promising that we'll have these really progressive compensation practices, and holding that line, and then finding my way in ensuring I'm continuing to provide transparency and carry that weight of this organization and these people's livelihoods depend on me. And so it's not a boo-hoo is me. It's so hard to be a leader, but it is a lot to carry. And I've given presentations. I got to do one for the Erie County Bar Association about practices for compensation and working parents. And I got like reviews. They did a little evaluation after, and people, even though I was indicating things that were like required by law, like giving women a place to breastfeed, those evaluations said that what I was suggesting was impractical and unrealistic, and that I was very energetic and fun, but no way could they do those things. And so I think it really made me double down on my desire to share about that and share about the lessons that I've learned. And there's just not one lesson. There's so many lessons along the way. And that's what it is. I think Corey touched on, and I should come back to my own privilege. I'm also a white woman and have had my own journey. And I also have really found my own paternalism within being a leader and how much I want to just take care of my employees, whether they like it or not. And so navigating what agency and relationship look like within an ownership as an owner of a business, right? I went from being a peer to being an owner and like really shifting the power. And that it became really isolating. And I suddenly needed to find a new peer group. And so I think that was something where I really needed to find support structures, and how important that is perhaps one of the biggest lessons I've learned.
Thank you so much. And as you said, it's important work. And I'm so appreciative and so looking forward to your book being available, learning more about what you're doing, and just genuinely excited about new generations of owners having these resources and lessons accessible to them. You touched briefly on this, but I do want to pose the question, what role do you think these type of practices play when it comes to equity and diversity within our field?
Just like the rest of the country, the evaluation field is undergoing major generational shifts in terms of the backgrounds, the identities, the point of view of who is in our field. And as Komani mentioned earlier, I think we, at this moment in time, with the loss of a lot of research funding, among other things, I believe we're truly in a place where we could lose the upcoming generation of evaluators. And that would be a crying shame. Definitely over the course of my professional career in evaluation, ownership has gone from being primarily male to primarily female, but is still very dominated by Caucasian people as a whole. That is changing. And I want that to keep changing, both among owners and among evaluators. And recognizing that fair pay is a really important part of living into one's values, as well as generous pay. I think a lot of evaluators, ourselves included, are in and around the nonprofit space. And many of those compensation practices, I should say, are premised on the idea that the real breadwinner, the real money earner, is at home, is the gentleman usually, or the spouse. And that's all kinds of problematic. And so not that's necessarily a conscious thought, I wouldn't think, for most evaluation owners. I think an echo of longstanding practices. And so the kinds of transparency, the kinds of clarity that we've talked about in terms of sharing compensation, sharing those principles, to me is one way to embrace equity. It's not everything. We definitely at Public Profit are on a years-long journey to be not just a diverse workplace, but a very inclusive workplace. And it's going to be our work probably for as long as the company lasts. And compensation is a big part of that.
So I don't think I said it earlier, but I'm not an evaluator. I know I'm actually in an MBA program right now. So I felt a little flack there, Corey, but I'm totally okay with it because I do love challenging business and challenging the norm. And so really, I think that is what we are doing, Corey and I, by being sharing our stories, by being on this podcast, is we're challenging these normal assumptions about things. And that is the only way to bring about more equity. Because when we start asking questions, which is what the field of evaluation is about, we start asking questions, we start finding, oh, maybe there is a better way to do this. But I also have found in my own personal journey of assessing my own racism and my own self, right? That there's no end goal. There's no right way to be. I can't perfect it. That doesn't exist. And going back to that, I have to implement processes that allow me to have this iteration over and over, ask ourselves the questions, right? Do the evaluation within our own organization of whether we are living these values or how have we done these things, and holding our own feet to the fire. I think it's challenged me because I have a really, kudos to me, I think I have a really great place to work, right? I think I provide a really great place to work. And I have a really not diverse staff because they don't leave. And so, how do I bring new talent in when I have a limitation of sort of the size of organization we wish to be? And how do I bring those new voices and support those things when we are in the space that we're in, right? Like, how do I make those changes? And it goes back to the, like, how do we change from a system that existed? And all I can say is challenge the norm, is that we just keep challenging the norm and proposing more radical practices, even if we're called impractical and unrealistic.
I love that call to action. And a lot of the work that I do and I try to do in this space is also promoting that people challenge the status quo, that we, even outside business owners, evaluators, demand these type of practices, ask these type of questions, because that's another way of creating that pressure and that motivation for things to start to change. So as we wrap up, I would love to hear your advice for evaluators that are seeking employment, evaluators that work within organizations. What's your advice for them, keeping in mind that the way you're operating is not the norm? How do you advise that they navigate these challenging compensation practices?
I do think that there is real value in employees asking just to understand what the baseline practices are. How are starting salaries set? How are they published? How are decisions made around compensate or around raises, those kinds of things. I would say also selfishly, I would also encourage folks who are engaging their owners or their supervisors around compensation to also help think creatively about how to change things. That oftentimes compensation choices link directly to who you are working with, how you are billing, how much you are charging, all these things. And that is a huge set of questions. And I'm not saying that as an employee, you should be on the hook for figuring all of this out, but I think even just acknowledging that these things are interconnected can maybe help open the door to conversations in a more open way than finding that brick wall that so many people have of just trust me. And that's definitely been, for me as an owner, I've felt really seen in those moments when folks say, I get it, that this is all interconnected and we need to do better. Those things can live together.
I love that. I love that practical advice for people on how to start these conversations and bring up these ideas in places where that's not the norm.
I think that's great advice, Corey. I agree that the only place to start is to start talking about it and proposing it. One of the things that I've spent a lot of time doing is trying to do presentations, both at the conference of AEA and to the ICTIG, about value-based pricing and why it's important. So reiterating or going back to this point about hours and hourly based pay, I think there's a real case for equity and flat rates and value rates to be able to, for compensation reasons. And so I think when we're talking about, if you are working as an evaluator and you're talking about a client and their pay, right, looking for those value-based situations, those flat rates, where you have the ability to go as deep as you'd like to. Maybe you really want to spend a lot of hours and you're okay with it averaging 11 cents an hour. Or maybe you are like, nope, I'm going to do the bare minimum on this project. And that's still enough to do a great thing for these people. And so I think that there is really this huge component that needs to be looked at around that your own value and what you feel worthy of. I got a lot of feedback when I gave one of these presentations that really struck people. When it comes to employees, if you're within an organization, I think exactly what Corey said is really the right place to start. I definitely would encourage you not to start with the let's have a 4-day work week, but like maybe the, hey, how could we navigate benefits as a group? Is there a way that we can have more say in the way that alternative types of compensation get allocated in the budget? Is there a way for employees to have a voice within that? Or, hey, what voice, or can we have a voice? We give surveys to our employees on a regular basis to find out, like, even though we have many benefit and various insurance policies that they have access to, we want to know the relative value to them, because if they don't value them and I'm giving it to them, what's the point? Having it be more something that you're discussing or getting that information on. And for owners, I think Corey and I often end these types of conversations saying, yeah, it's scary and you're going to mess up. And that's okay, because that is part of the process. But part of that process of messing up is fessing up to the fact that you messed up. And so it really is about you coming into yourself as a leader, as an owner, and understanding your own values and morals so that you can go forward bravely. In that, I'm trying to think of Brene Brown, right? Like, she is like really emphasizes like what bravery looks like. There's a whole book about it anyway, but really, what does bravery look like? And it's doing it even though you're scared, right? Even though it could go badly. I think that's the type of risk taking we have to take as owners. And it's the only way that we will challenge the norm and increase equity within our workplaces.
I love that. Thank you so much, both of you. That was such great advice for both employees, business owners. So as we wrap up, would you like to end with any final thoughts?
This is Corey, and I think for me, the invitation for business owners or other folks who are setting compensation to just really sit and honestly reflect on the connections between the values that they bring to the business and the ways in which compensation is reflecting that. And it is scary and hard, and you will disappoint yourself almost always to start. And it's essential to do that. And that was, again, as I mentioned at the top of our time together, I got on this path through a really painful, really difficult professional experience that I don't wish on anyone. And so would encourage folks to have that reflection in a quiet, safe moment on their own so that they can really build that confidence to start doing and thinking differently.
Perhaps what I'll just add is, in the work that we do as leaders is largely around communication and the relationships that we're developing with our employees who are human beings. And I think those are things to circle to whenever anything's astray, is to just go back to having conversations. I heard I don't know, probably not a parable, but a phrase that's like the biggest problem with communication is that people believe it's happening. And I think that just is tenfold for leaders, where we just, because of life and the way that things are, don't always get the right message across, or we say something and we thought, good job, you really just nailed it. And then somebody's having some conversation on the side going, what the heck are they talking about? And that, what is the communication process, and digging into that is a really foundational component to this work as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everything you've shared, for all of the hard work you're doing and sharing with others. I think that our field can only benefit from learning from your experiences and from this momentum to grow. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.